Everybody, welcome to this very, very exciting segment of LA Blockchain Summit. I have here with me the one and only Robert Leshner of Compound Finance, a godfather for crypto lending. Robert, how you doing?
Doing great, and I'm happy to be here with you all.
Yeah, and we're very, very excited to have you. It's your first time here at LA Blockchain Summit, and we have a lot in store, right? We have a whole entire DeFi panel, a DeFi track put in place, and having you a part of it was a no-brainer. So thanks for being a part of it. So I want to take this interview from a more personal perspective, right? There's a ton of content about you already online discussing the amazing things you're doing in finance with Compound, but I'm particularly curious behind learning more about you as a person, right? Because we have a lot of new faces in the audience and a lot of familiar ones. Okay. So the reason I bring this up is that you're a role model and a great example of what crypto projects can amass to if they think differently and if they start early. Okay. So my first question to you is, what is it about you and the way you're wired that has you obsessed with finance and more specifically DeFi?
That's a great question. So I think it's actually a matter of circumstance and timing and luck for, how this all sort of came together. So I began my career in finance working in interest rates. I was actually an interest rate economist and forecaster. I was a rates guy. After that, I moved into the sort of traditional Silicon Valley startup scene where it's venture-backed companies building new products, working on something new. When Ethereum launched, I sort of looked at this and I said, well, this combines, two of my, passions. One is finance and the other is being able to build new things. And I saw it as a platform that could be used to build entirely new financial products. I got really excited. And in 2017, I set out to create an interest rate market for Ethereum assets that would enable people to have new functionality on the blockchain to either earn an interest rate on crypto in a protocol or to be able to borrow crypto assets. And we designed it as a protocol that other applications could be built on top of, and it's been growing ever since.
Amazing. So I kind of want to take this and start this kind of like looking back at your professional career. Okay. So how did you go from being a product lead at Postmates to founding and building one of the leading DeFi projects? And more specifically, as a follow on, take us through some of the major similarities in building a food delivery app to building interest market rates for cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's funny because they both exist in this class of entities called marketplaces, where you have to attract different users that come together to create the end product. In one case, it's people delivering food. In one case, it's people ordering food, and the other is people supplying assets and borrowing assets from them. It's a marketplace, and so there are a lot of similarities in that. And how you think about creating something and getting it off the ground and building liquidity and then density to the marketplace. So they're less different than you actually might think. And one of the things that we focused on early was taking a lot of the experiences we had building applications for users and translating that to DeFi. It didn't even have the term DeFi then. But we basically said, let's build products that people want to use. The user experience of, all this was very different, all of 3 years ago. And we really started off with a mindset of let's build something that users enjoy interacting with.
Okay, it's super interesting. And you've built such an incredible platform, which has also led you to become quite an active investor and advisor to projects, probably more on the investor side. So something you could also kind of tell us your journey through creating Robot Ventures, right? What do you look for in a team or a project before cutting a check? And as a follow-on, what would you say is your preferred way to be pitched? Do you have a specific formality that you go through? Is it just a deck submission? What do you look for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started investing in other teams and founders back when DeFi was a much lonelier market. There was only a couple companies and a couple teams in the space. It was very different just a couple years ago. Now there's a billion teams and a billion people trying to create something new. And so for me, investing in other teams and projects was a way to understand, their worldview and what they were thinking and why and how they were solving problems. And it was really with the goal of educating both myself and the teams I was investing in. So I began, investing in projects a couple years ago. I've, become a more active investor over the last few years. I've probably invested in about 30 different DeFi projects or so. oftentimes at the very earliest stages, either before they've raised venture funding or in their first venture financing. And, for me, I like to look for things that, seem like, a compound-like project, where it's a team trying to do something new that hasn't been done before, that they have a lot of belief and conviction in. There's oftentimes, 15 different attempts to build the same product, and that's great. But what gets me most excited are teams that are trying to approach something entirely differently and think on their own, and not try to copy something else, but try to approach it in the market from creating an entirely new product that doesn't yet exist. And that's what I get really excited about. I try to be extremely accessible both on Telegram and Twitter, and in the wild, anyone can basically just hit me up at any time and say, this is what I'm working on. And I love to alpha test new things. I think that it's very easy to, talk about an idea. It's much harder to build even a crude working prototype of it. And so, what I love most is being able to alpha test a product, being the first one to play around with it and say oh, this is great in these 4 ways. And, this part feels completely broken and help solve problems with teams.
Right. So I guess the follow-on question to that, so would you see yourself more as a hands-on investor, or do you prefer just to cut the check and let the team do their thing, or do you look for projects that you believe you could add value yourself to?
Yeah. So, what I like to add most is knowledge and experience. Even at the venture stage, most of the, investors in a DeFi application, all of the names on the cap table, very rarely is somebody an actual operator and founder in the space. Almost always, all the names on the cap table are just investors who are providing capital but haven't walked the walk that the founder's trying to walk, And it makes sense in other industries where, there's 20 years of best practices. An investor doesn't have to have founded a company to know what to expect. Right. But oftentimes I find that, I'm the only other name on a cap table that's been founding a DeFi application with, a founder that's trying to get something new off the ground. And so what I really try to convey are my own lessons and experiences I've learned personally in building a financial marketplace that, founders, are going to run into themselves. And hopefully I can just, accelerate the learning curve and shave a month off of their own experience.
Right. No, that's awesome. And kind of just to pivot more into the ethos of DeFi. Okay. So when you are approaching decentralized finance, right, and you're talking about open finance, how do you and your team kind of think of marketing and growth from 2 perspectives? One, getting more non-crypto native individuals comfortable with earning above average interest on their money, and 2, encouraging more devs to build on top of Compound?
That's a great question. I actually think the 2 pieces go hand in hand. So Compound is a protocol. It's not meant to always be like an application that end users interact with. We had, consumer interfaces at the get-go so that it could build initial liquidity. But the end goal is not to attract users directly to the protocol, because I don't believe, over time, users are going to themselves interact with smart contracts. I don't think they're going to get out MetaMask, and I think it's a temporary user experience. But what I think is the end state is that as a protocol, other applications and systems get built on top of it. So, over time, we're not trying to market to users. We're trying to create a platform for developers. And developers can be exchanges, custodians, institutions, applications, other different service providers that can plug into this. And they're the ones who build up an audience and a customer base and market to them and educate users all around the world. And so I think that's, the sort of methodology by which this plays out. We're really, historically haven't tried to win over individual users. We've tried to create a platform that anyone can build on top of. And in the process, over the last couple of months of decentralizing that protocol and handing it off to the community, that was done with an eye towards creating a platform that people know is going to be around in the future. That's not reliant on me anymore.
Right. No, that's very interesting. So now you guys have been around for a few years now, right? And obviously you've collected tons of data. Okay. So I'm curious, what are some of the most interesting insights you've discovered from users leveraging Compound over the last few years?
That's a great question. I think the most interesting thing that I've learned is that, adoption comes in like, waves, right? It took Compound a long time to get to $10 million of assets in the protocol. It was probably like we're a year in before we had $10 million of assets. And then it was another year before, the protocol had $100 million of assets. And it was probably another year before it had $1 billion of assets in it. And what's funny is at each one of these junctures, it seems crazy to the broader marketplace. When Compound first had $10 million in it, people said, oh my God, there's $10 million in a smart contract and a protocol. And like that number for the entire Ethereum ecosystem was large. MakerDAO had like $40 million and Compound had $10 million, right? That was like the scope of the entire industry. And it sounded crazy to even talk about like 100 million. Right. And then when Compound had 100 million, everyone in their mind thought that was like the upper bound of the industry, right? It was like, oh, Maker and Compound have like $100 million in them. Like that's like the upper bound. And now, projects are able to amass $1 billion in that week, Yeah. And it's a completely different, scale. And so the thing that surprised me the most is that the ecosystem as a whole, moves in these step functions, sort of simultaneously as like more and more capital and users become aware and accessible to the market.
So it's quite interesting. And I guess the next question I have in mind is a lot of us are deep into DeFi. A lot of people watching, they understand governance models, they understand tokenomics and all these other buzzwords that run the day-to-day of the crypto sector, okay? So for a platform like yours that is breaking the bank, that's creating interest markets for cryptocurrencies, right? And a lot of these other DeFi projects aim to kind of revolutionize finance as we know it, right? And create a new decentralized world for all, right? As the narrative goes. How do you actually explain DeFi, right? And the benefit of DeFi when a lot of the world is actually really financially illiterate, right? That they kind of depend on the normalities of banking. They depend on going in and walking into a retail bank and depositing their money. And they're not as technically savvy as I guess younger generations may be.
Yeah, so I think DeFi in its purest sense is able to build financial products that are faster, cheaper, more robust, more transparent, and more fair than any financial product that currently exists in the legacy financial system. And that's the promise of it, right? That's like what we're creating as like a community. And I think that's going to have benefits for everybody. It'll probably, for the most part, start off looking unfair, where most of those benefits will accrue to users who already have, financial access and knowledge, where their financial products will just get faster, cheaper, more fair. But eventually, I think that will sort of roll out and create more access to the entire world. And so, I think it's going to, like anything, have waves to it, but, it holds the promise of just, creating significantly better financial products.
Okay. And before we finish up, I have two more questions for you because I know we're on a time crunch. So you mentioned your whole thing of assets under management, right? And you guys have quite a large amount under management. Okay. So, and especially without having the guardrails that the traditional finance has to offer, how do you view your responsibility with managing so much money?
Yeah. So managing is the wrong word because, there's no.
Well, yeah, right.
But, since day zero, everything that the development of the protocol had was focused on safety. Compound has probably had like 12 audits, both technical and economic, where, that mindset doesn't exist as much today with new financial applications and DeFi projects. In getting to this scale in each wave, going from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1 billion inside the protocol, all of that occurred over time and on the backdrop of significant analysis, auditing, and control that went into ensuring that the protocol was safe for each level of assets. And that's a challenge that I think all of DeFi is going to have to focus on and stay focused on as they launch new tools.
Okay. And my last question is because the last few months, DeFi has literally gone on a roller coaster and it's probably brought in a lot of new people that haven't really heard about DeFi. So for anyone that's new in the space, what's that like one bit of advice that you would give them that you would have wished you received when you were building Compound in the beginning?
Yeah, just be focused on the long term. there's a lot of, things that attract attention and capital and visibility that, won't necessarily be here in a couple of years. And so I would say like focus on, what's creating real value for users and applications, and not what is, the flashiest thing happening in the moment.
Cool. Perfect. That's a great way to end. Robert, thank you so, so much. We loved having you here. And everyone that's watching, be sure to tune into the rest of LA Blockchain Summit. Guys, thank you again. We'll see you
Thanks for
next
having me.
time.